Hi, Misha here, and in my last video looking at Eaglemoss's collection of diecast models from the Battlestar Galactica universe, I mentioned that issues 24 and 25 came in unannounced and together, and that means we now have the complete set. And so I've been doing kind of overview, breakdown, commentary videos. Number 1 I did around the holidays, and it looked at the complete Cylon fleet. Number 2 we did in February, and that looked at the Battlestars and their primary fighters, the Vipers. And that was already big and long enough, so I had to split the Colonial vessels into 2. And of course I was waiting on the last issues to get here anyway. So number 3 will be the wrap-up video looking at the support craft, the civilian, and just some oddballs besides. So with that, we'll just kind of get started, and I'll give my 2 cents. We start off with the oldest one in the collection, the Raptor. And this was, I think, issue 9 or issue 10. I think it was 10. Could be wrong, though. Probably am. I'm sure you'll let me know. And this is specifically Boomer's Raptor. So this is the Raptor in its clean version. The Raptor was a multi-purpose craft. Personnel transport. It has a standard crew of 2. Side-by-side seated, the pilot and the electronics officer or co-pilot. And then it has a cabin in the back that can either be used for cargo or to transport wounded or to drop troops. It can carry about 8 fully armed troops or 10 or so just people without equipment. So it can be used for those purposes. Also, it can be used as electronic warfare, a scout, because this has an FTL drive. It's about the smallest ship in the Colonial fleet, about the smallest, mind you, that has FTL. But it has limited range and limited thallium fuel. It can carry enough for about 10 standard jumps, or with auxiliary tanks up to about 20. And on top of that, it's also a true V-stall, vertical takeoff and landing, or short takeoff and landing aircraft with jets underneath and what have you. So it's a multi-purpose vehicle. In the real world, this was inspired by the AH-64 Apache, and I have to think there's a bit of UH-1 Huey in here as well, the Iroquois. They also said the EA-6B Prowler, the Navy's electronic warfare bird, inspired a bit of it. I could see that. It's not ginormous, but it's not tiny in universe either. About 8.5 meters, I believe. And it's an older craft in the Colonial fleet. We know that these were involved at least in the latter stages of the first Cylon War. And unlike Vipers, they don't use the launch tubes. They just take off from the deck. And they have chaff and flare dispensers for defense. It's an old, kind of bulky craft, but very configurable. This is the Colonial equivalent to the Cylon's Heavy Raider. So, this one came in early on, and I was very excited about it. And I do like it. You know, it's a little lighter than I expected, even though it's got some bulk to it, and the main body is metal because of all the detailing going on. The majority of it seems to be polymer, and it's not a disappointment, but you know, it's a little lighter than I expected. Not sure which scale these are in. They don't really make them to any particular scale. Sits on its stand just fine. But interestingly, 10 issues later, I believe it was 20, we got a very similar vehicle, the so-called Heavy Raptor. And that seems to be a name that Eaglemoss kind of coined, because I didn't really find any use of it before this model came out. But we definitely see these, for example, in the retaking of New Caprica and rescuing of the civilians there. This is the definitely armed up version, showing just how much a Raptor can carry. And it's pretty neat. It's also heavier. It has 30mm cannon on each wingtip, complete with showing the ammunition belts. It also has these unguided rocket pods here. Where are we at? And we've got a cluster of missiles here. And then we have more up here. So it shows you all the hard points external. The Raptor also had 2 internal bays. They could either carry ship-to-ship missiles, even nuclear, or they could carry additional fuel tank. So that's, you know, kind of neat. Showing its 2 FTL drives in the back here. And I believe these things in the back are supposed to be chaff and flare dispensers. Now, I'm not disappointed they did this one. And I'm also not disappointed they did boomers, because main character, you know. On the other hand, this does show why sometimes it's not good that Eaglemoss does static models, because if this were a Hobby Master model, it would just come with, say, removable ordnance, and you could set it up in whichever mode you like. But at least they were separated by 10 issues, which, considering these came out only one every 2 to 3 months, meant that they were separated by a good bit of time. Both neat, but yeah, the heavy, it's got a lot more going on. Pretty cool. And our next 2 are kind of a set in a way as well. Here we have the Land Ram and the new Colonial Shuttle. And I say they're a set because this shuttle can carry a Land Ram. But the Land Ram itself, the model, came out long before the shuttle. And I, at first, did not buy this. In fact, this is our only ground vehicle in the whole collection. So, in a lot of ways, I kind of just bought it out of obligation. And since it's from the original series and was a practical model, even a vehicle made from a real world, I think it was a snowcat of some type, it's pretty much a box. It kind of reminds you of a Star Trek shuttle. Just a straightforward box. I don't know how big in universe it's supposed to be. Never could find a measurement, but not huge. We have a crew of 2 in the front, and then a crew compartment in the back that's supposed to hold up to 10. I would think they'd have to be pretty tightly packed in there, but, you know, I digress. It is fully tracked. And we have a turret on the top with 2 cannon. I'm sure in the original series they would have been laser. And we do see that these can be configured and set up for various missions. The model itself is actually very heavy because the entire box is metal. Only the tracks and the guns are plastic. So in terms of feeling like you get your money's worth, I'll give them that. It is a solid critter. And pretty good size, too. Now, these are in the Reimagined series as well. We see one on Galactica's flight deck in the museum, and it's used occasionally to help out flight deck operations, kind of acting as a tug. And we see them used as a mining vehicle in Season 2 when they're getting Thallium. So, yeah, it's just kind of an all-purpose, all-terrain, you know, pretty much like a small APC. I wouldn't quite call it an armored fighting vehicle because of only having 2 light guns and not much else. So, I don't hate it, and it is in both series. But it's it's a box with treads, if I'm being honest. Our new shuttle, I'm actually more impressed with than I thought I would be. I was kind of expecting it to be more of just a box as well. And of course it is. But it's got more going on. And it's more elongated than I expected. And it's got, I don't know if they're supposed to be legs or thrusters. I assume thrusters. Anyway, we've got two big sublight engines. From the original series, this is a non-FTL capable vessel. It is, of course, in the Reimagined series. In fact, it's one of the very first ships we ever see. And in that, it seems to be FTL capable. There's a bit of a discrepancy on its size. Some sources 20 meters, some sources 26. Take it as you will. It's not tiny. And it has a crew of 2 in the original series and 4 as standard in the Reimagined. And then in the cargo compartment, it can carry 40 troopers in the original series or more. And in the Reimagined, it seems it's down to 24, which would make sense if they had to put in FTL drives. Considering the Raptor has an FTL and it's quite a bit smaller than this, it makes perfect sense that the shuttle would as well. Plus, you know, space is big, so without faster than light, it's hard to get anywhere, frankly. But yeah, I actually like it more than I thought I would. And that's not to say I thought I would hate it, but I wasn't super excited about it when they announced it, but I thought, well, there's not many original series models to build, so this is a good one to build because it was featured a lot. And I always like it when there's ships that appeared in both. It's a nice tribute. Let's move to the back row. Next up, we have a unique model of a unique one-off vessel. This is the Colonial Blackbird named Laura. And this is a big one. It's kind of on par with the Viper Mark III. And at first it might look like a Viper. It was designed to work from the Viper launch tubes, but actually it's really nothing like that. This was a craft assembled, cobbled together, if you will, on board Galactica by really the entire deck crew and even some of the senior officers helping out in some ways. It started off as a project just to try to cannibalize damaged Vipers and to try to make flyable vessels, but it quickly turned into a stealth reconnaissance vessel. And that's what we see it in. It's only in a couple of episodes, but it plays a major role, photographing the resurrection ship for the first time. So, yeah, it's good they did it. Originally, it was unarmed. It just had a camera. Later, they would retroactively fit a missile to it, presumably internal. For stealth, or Dratus absorbing, they gave it a carbon fiber hull instead of metal. So kind of the same material that was on the American Space Shuttle. The engines, it has 4 engines, and these are actually from a civilian vessel, presumably a freighter of some type, that are considered obsolescent engines. The cockpit is obviously from a Mark II Viper. And it actually has a FTL drive. It's probably about the smallest Colonial ship to ever have one. And that would seem to be taken from a salvaged Raptor, because it's compact enough. So it probably doesn't have much jump range or many jumps it can do. But it is built for high sublight speeds. But as we saw on the show, it's not very maneuverable, or at least controllable. And this is a pretty impressive model. It's not my favorite, but I really like it. It's a good size, pretty good weight, interesting texture and feel to it. It came out pretty early on in the series, I think around issue 14 or 15. And I'm glad they did it, because it was a pretty major plot point in the show. So, well, if I'm being honest, sometimes I forget about this one a bit. When I remember it, it always makes me happy they did do it. It's also very metal. The hull's metal, and actually a lot of the lower hull is metal too. That's pretty unique for these. So really it's only these engine nacelles. Even this area my thumb's at here behind the cockpit is metal. So yeah, it's not lightweight. My only real gripe about it, it doesn't have a notch that it fits into on the stand, so it can get pushed. I don't think moving the other way works any better. No, it's definitely this way. That was a problem with some of the earliest models in the series before that. I think they kind of figured the trick of adapting these. It's fine, just don't knock it. It's not going to get knocked off side to side, but if you have it on a shelf, just be mindful front to back movement. So a very good average model in what is frankly an outstanding collection. Next up we have Colonial I, and this model came in on like Christmas Eve for me, and it was Christmas of 2019, which, if I'm being honest with you, was kind of the last time life seemed normal, if that makes sense. So a lot of good memories around this one, frankly. And it's a good model. They did a good job. It's very long and narrow, and it has these big flaps on the rear here. It's got two large sublight engines. This is all plastic, but the main body is metal. I still think it looks better if I'm flying like this. I kind of like the flange hanging down, but everyone told me it should be the other way, so okay. This is basically a 747 in space. It's about 85 meters long, about 15 meters wide, so much longer than it is wide, and it can carry about 150 people, maybe 200, and up to 500 in emergency situations. It's got a cockpit very reminiscent of the space shuttle, and it has a lot of elements in the design from the shuttle from a 2001 A Space Odyssey. So that's neat. So it has a very real world grounded feel. It does have a small shuttle bay or docking bay, as we see Leodama's Viper connect with it. And we know that in the show some of the bays were converted for passenger transport. This just started off as a normal transport. I think it was Caprica Heavy 798, but once the whole government was obliterated in the fall, it became Colonial I and would be the seat of civilian power throughout the series. Originally, the Quorum would meet on Cloud 9, which I'm a little surprised they didn't make a model of that, but okay. But once that was blown up at the end of Season 2, this became the de facto chamber where they were meeting. And we do see it land on New Caprica. Once Baltar is president, there are sleeping quarters and other quarters on board. It is an autonomous vessel that can, work on its own, but it's also small enough that it will fit in one of Galactica's large hangar bays. So this is just a standard transport, Caprican liner, and seems to be a pretty common model. We see these in use before the first Cylon War, and since it's hauling around members of the government of the 12 colonies, they must be keeping them up to date. But then again, we've got plenty of aircraft that have been flying 40 or 50 years that are just updated. But it's a really neat model, and it was our first definitively civilian ship we got in the whole collection. Kind of reminds me of a pickle cut in half too. But yeah, I really like this one. Again, when it came in. A lot of good memories there. It also sits on its stand very well, as you see, which, easily could have not worked out, but there you go. And our last one, and another civilian ship, the one that just came in, the Astral Queen. This was a luxury passenger liner decades before, relegated to bulk freight hauling and, at the time of the fall, prisoner transport. It was carrying 1,500 convicts, including Tom Zerk, to parole hearings on Caprica, and frankly just got lucky. Actually, it was discovered by Boomer's vessel. And like like Colonial I, it has a very long body, narrow. But this is quite a bit bigger, about 258 meters, which explains why it can hold so many more people. But it only requires about a dozen, maybe 14 people to operate as a ship, so it's, pretty straightforward. FTL capable, no weapons, and as we see, it can land on a planet because it's on the surface of New Caprica, pretty much alongside Colonial I. And it's another ship that appears a lot in the series, and it's usually part of some trouble. First with the prisoners, then it's part of the Rosalind Zerk breakaway fleet at the end of Season 1. Like I said, it's landed in New Caprica at the end of Season 2. Season 3, it's pretty quiet, except it does get damaged a bit in the battle. And in Season 4, it's part of the Felix Gaeta, Tom Zarek mutiny again. And then at the end of the show, it's again serving as a prisoner ship. And this model just came in. It's pretty neat. And now in the show, it's named Astral Queen. And this model is a recreation of the prisoner barge from the original series. So much like with the shuttle, it exists in both. It's got good weight to it. This front section's metal. The center here is metal. The edges are plastic. Of course, the rear is plastic. So it weighs about the same as Colonial I, maybe a smidgen heavier in the front because of this saucer section. It does have several landing bays and loading bays. I'm a little surprised they did not do the Demetrius either. There's several civilian ships, but, let's be honest, the Cylon stuff did not sell as well. The ones that really sold well were the Vipers and the Battlestars. So, for anything else, they had to be pretty choosy about what they did. Colonial I's a no-brainer. This sits in there pretty good. Not as nice as Colonial I, but it sits very low, too, I've noticed. Kind of upswept a bit there. It works. I like it. At least it gives us a little bit of a feel of the ragtag fleet. Again, it's new to me, just like the shuttle, so I haven't had a whole lot of time to study it, but it's pretty straightforward. It definitely looks like what would have been a passenger liner, a cruise ship in space. So, yeah. There we go. Okay, it's a little groove there it kind of sits in. It's a little better there. Yeah, once it's in its little groove, it's pretty stable. It doesn't clip in, really, but it sits in there pretty good. Better than the Blackbird. So yeah, there we kind of go for the wrapping up of the fleet. What do you think? And lined up again one more time. I was telling the wife that I'm kind of sad it's over, this collection. The Star Trek collection, I got into it about halfway through. But the Battlestar Galactica collection, I followed pretty much from the beginning and waited, every 2 or 3 months for one to come out. And they were pretty consistent. Sometimes you'd get one a month. And sometimes you'd have to wait 6 months to get one, but that's kind of how 2020, 2021 went. One thing I will say is there were no huge disappointments. The Scar model had the flaw of only 1 engine instead of 3, but outside of that, it was a nice model with nice texturing. The Raptors, I wish there could have been a way to do one model that could be armed up or, smooth like this. This one, they really had to do because it was boomers. But this one I'm really glad they did because it's just interesting and it kind of celebrates the liberation of New Caprica. Colonial I was a no-brainer, and one of the first times they really branched out from the core military ships. Like I said, the Blackbird here, if they had not done it, I wouldn't miss it, but I think they did a good job, and I'm glad they did it. And it always delights me when I kind of rediscover it, if that makes sense. The Astral Queen, especially considering it was in both the original series and the reimagined, I'm very glad we have it. I wish we could have had more of the civilian fleet, but, at least we got something. And to the end, the Land Ram, where did I put it? Here it is. I understand why they did it, to give the fans of the original series a few more models, because there just aren't that many. But it does kind of stick out, because it's the only ground vehicle, and it's so simple compared to the rest. So, yeah, I could have done without the Land Ram. I think given what they had to work with, they did the best job they could. And it probably would have been nicer if Eaglemoss models weren't static. Again, if it had moving tracks, a moving turret, making it a little more dynamic. But that's just, they do fixed displays. They don't do moving parts. That's just Eaglemoss. Conversely, the shuttle, as I said, I was kind of neutral towards. I definitely was going to get it because it was in both shows and it kind of completes the flight deck of any Battlestar. But I really like it. Part of it is the design's a little more interesting than I thought it would be. But in other parts, Eaglemoss went very metal with this. So, yeah, it's a pleasant surprise. What do you think? Which ones do you like? So, 25 issues, and none of them were absolute failures or duds. And only a couple I could have done without. But even those, I still picked up. Again, the Land Ram was the only one I debated not. Kind of the same thing with the Cylon Centurions. But those I'm actually really glad I did. I was kind of impressed with how they did those as well. I guess they're my fighters against the Land Ram since they're both ground forces, right? But I'm more into space stuff, although in the last year or so I've gotten more into tanks and stuff for real-world military and away from airplanes. But at the end of the day, aviation and spaceships and aircraft are just kind of what I'm into. That's my jam, as they say. I think they did a good job. We don't get many Battlestar Galactica things, either original series or the reimagined. And since the show's been off the air for coming up on 15 years, it was funny we got this. The collection came out about 10 years after the series went off air. But that is what Eaglemoss does. They revisit some old stuff. I mean, they're doing Stargate now when there's not much activity, so that doesn't seem to dissuade them. But I just wanted to do a final overview and thoughts video because, yeah, it's something I'm glad I participated in and waited each month for. And, yeah, I almost remember every day each one of these came in. Especially these last couple here, because I wasn't expecting it at all, and it was a nice surprise. Kind of started the day off right when it was in the mail, and ended up being a pretty good day, at least compared to what we've had recently. And I will miss seeing new issues show up or checking the website to see what comes next, but it was probably time. 25 is a good round number, right? And I feel like they hit all the major highlights. Well, we could go on forever with the ragtag fleet, but like I said, sales would probably be very low. Just because people want the battle stars, they want the Vipers. Even the Cylon stuff doesn't sell well. It's the same thing with Star Trek. The Federation ships sell better than, say, Klingon, especially in the Discovery lineup. But if you haven't, you might check out my previous 2 overviews. And as always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. With that, this is Misha saying, so say we all.